So today we're going to talk about two things in particular. How a term can be universal, particular, and singular, and then whether a term is collective or used divisively. And there were more in the book than the ones I presented you. The reality is this is enough. This universal, particular, and singular is going to be absolutely necessary for us to understand propositions, how they appear in a syllogism. And I'm going to show you how this applies to your daily life. There's no way you can say this is not useful to you. When it comes to simply understanding a term, you always have to keep in mind it has to be clear, exact, and unambiguous. Those three things, if you can keep that, I don't care where you go, if you're an engineer, if you're a poet, it doesn't matter what discipline you go into. Every time you talk or write, ask yourself, is it clear, is it unambiguous? What's the other one? I already forget. Clear and ambiguous and exact, I guess, okay? So you want to know that. So that way, I'm hoping you guys have great things to say in your life, and people are getting the great things that you have to say, okay? Because you think of the great speeches in our world, could you imagine if we weren't clear on what they were saying, or there was ambiguous, or it was equivocal, you know? Anyway, all right, so let's look at this. When we start looking at these, you're probably going to be thinking this is so obvious. But it's not always going to be clear when we are in the exercises. And also, I'm going to show you, why these things are important in a proposition as it applies to a syllogism. All right? So first off, universal. To say something universal means it applies to the entire members of the class. Okay? It accounts for everybody within that class, whatever we're talking about. A universal term applies to the entire members of that class. So if I were to say all, now, by the way, we're not talking about, well, let me just leave that. I'm not going to add that element here yet. All high school students are under 21 years old. Okay? That's true. Because as far as I know, in the state of Pennsylvania, you cannot be a 22-year-old high school student. You get graduated one way or another. All right? And I had a friend in high school that he graduated at 21. You're out. Okay? Go do something else. This isn't a retirement community. All right? So all high school students. So that is a universal expression. I am talking about the entire members of the high school class. All right? No exceptions. No exceptions. Now that's pretty straightforward. But we don't always talk like that. We use other words to express universality. Okay? And we have to get on our radar what are other ways that are expressed. Well, here's some examples. If I were to say no one graduates from high school without a diploma, that's a universal term. I am talking about every member of high school. No one without, I could rephrase that. I could say all that graduate with high school are those that graduate with a diploma. All right? I put it, we're always going to do that. And I'll show you later how we always put things into what's known as an A proposition. You don't know what that is yet. But it's, all grass is green. There's no clearer way to express yourself. We will always do that, all right? And try to do that, okay? If we were to say every good boy does fine, we are talking all those who are good boys are those who do fine, all right? That's how I would put that into an A proposition. But the reality is, every good boy does fine is how we talk in normal language, all right? You just have to, when you see that, get in your mind it's a universal term. Because if you can't say some, if you can say all or none, you're in a universal situation. God will always love you. That which is God is that which will always love you. All right? It's all of that which is God. So again, it's a universal. This applies to everybody in that class. And then finally, none of the drugs are without side effects. I am talking about the entire class of those drugs. That may not be the clearest way to say it. I mean, you might answer somebody like that. Do any have side effects? No. None of them are without, or do some. None are without. Are any without side effects? No, none are without side effects. But it would be even clearer to say all drugs have side effects, right? We're always trying to put it in there. Now, how do you and I know this? Because you guys are always going to be, and I'm not only talking down condescendingly, but you will be talking to people that may not have the level of expertise in your field that you have. So if you're talking peer-to-peer, then go ahead, lay it out and let them figure it out. But if you're talking to people that are not of your expertise, you've got to make sure they're getting it clear. So you guys that are going to become elementary school teachers, right, you might want to say, everybody needs their coats or something like that. you're going to start talking simple. You know, all the people that are here, everybody in this room has to have your coats before we go out. Somebody will say, do I have to have my coat? All of you have. You're going to keep trying to go into the simplest form so there's absolutely no misunderstanding of what you're trying to say. That's the beauty of the universal terms, all right? They're extremely easy to comprehend. But here's the problem. Even though when you see none, always, every, and no, that may be equal to all, but we don't always even see those. Sometimes we just see words that are similar. In other words, it's just implied. For instance, if somebody tells you triangles have 3 sides, that's universal. Because what you are really saying is all that which is triangles are those that would have 3 sides. So if you are an elementary school teacher and you have your 6th grade class wherever they learn anything about geometry, and you're trying to say, I want all of you to draw a triangle, and some kid raises his hand and says, does it have to have 3 sides? You're going to say, well, all triangles have 3 sides. You're going to start talking like that, okay? Even if the other ones, instead of saying, there are no triangles that don't have 3 sides, that's still going to confuse the kid. Wait, there's no triangles that have all triangles. Oh, okay. It's just a clearer way to express it, okay? God is love. To say God is love is really all that which is God is love. All right? Nobody's going to talk like this, okay? But if we say God is love, that's universal, okay? Even though we didn't use the word all, we didn't use the word no, we didn't use the word every, it's implied, all right? So we have to get, so what happens when we communicate is this is how we write. If we're writing to people that understand the context, fine. If we're writing to people that may not be at the same level of expertise, we need to put it into more logical form so that way they absolutely understand it. You see, I don't know where you can go in life this isn't applicable, okay? Just to be aware of it. Even if it seems like it's silly, that yeah, I get it. That's a universal term. All right, so particulars. Particular terms, the term applies to some members of the class. Okay? The term applies only to some members of the class. So, I might say, some high school students will not go to college. Well, what are you saying? Are you saying I'm not going to college? No. I mean, do you see how these things get miscommunicated in speech? If I were talking to a group, I said, well, some people don't go to college. You're saying I'm not going to college. No, I said some will not go to college. That's particular. You're talking to me. No, I didn't point you out, did I? I talked as the entire, some of the entire class. In other words, now, as opposed to universal, there are exceptions. I didn't point out who those exceptions were. I'm just saying that there are. Okay? Some high school students will not go to college. As soon as we see some, we know that we are in one of the particulars. And you don't need to know this now, but this will be a particular type of proposition. All right? Just like the universal terms, there are other words that will represent, that's wrong, not universality. There are other words and negatives that represent particulars. I didn't see that mistake earlier.
What is it going to be?
Particulars. Okay, that I copy and pasted that down from the upper one and I didn't overwrite it. So other words and negatives represent particulars. Okay? So how do we know when we are in a particular? Anytime that you can see an exception, anytime you think you can use the word some, you're in particulars. Occasionally a student will earn 100% on a test. So some students will get 100% on the test. Correct. That's just the way I would reword it using some, right? Or I could say, you know, all students will not get 100. I mean, I could always put it back in an A proposition usually, all right? Sometimes good boys do not do fine. So not all of them do fine, that's right. Some don't, all right? There's exceptions. If you can say that, you're good. Not all people will love God. There's exceptions, so that's particulars. There are a few drugs that are without side effects, all right? So we could take those and we could even put those into a some proposition if we had to, just to make it more understandable, all right? You get the point? Now, singular. This term applies only to one member of the class. This term applies only to one member of the class. And then when we do the next slide, I'll show you how this and another thing can get confusing and cause irritations when you're having discussions about sensitive subjects. Because when you talk about so-called controversial or sensitive subjects, it is even more critical that we are very clear and unambiguous and exact in what we say. Because if somebody's going to hold you to what you said, make sure that they're holding you to what you spoke and not what they think they heard or have transcribed it to a larger class. Yes, George?
Could you use this for propositions and arguments?
Oh, you will. Yeah, you absolutely. I mean, you have to. You have to. You know, like I didn't teach you guys like the squares of oppositions and everything, but an A proposition is all SSP. You know, an E proposition is some SSP. You know, E no SSP, and then some are not. You know, so if you don't know if it's particular or universal, we're not going to know what to do with it.
But I mean, like a proposition only applying to one situation or something.
Oh, like the singular? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe, like here is a proposition that applies to one singular. You, George, will graduate from high school. You know, I could say that, you know, and that could be a true proposition. I am saying you, all right? But look, when we talk out in public sometimes, if I were to say you, some people are already thinking that implies they won't. That's not what I said, right? I mean, so we have to be very clear that when we, especially things that are opposite of what our beliefs are because of our particular, you know, bias that we always bring. We all bring this, you know, this bias to something. This is called reading into things, right? You know, if somebody says you have nice hair, well, we never said that before, you know, something like that. So we read into maybe they don't think I like our hair otherwise. If I say you're going to go to college, well, I'm not. No, I'm using a very singular term, okay? I'm not talking about some or I'm not talking about all, okay? So you will graduate from high school. Now, the only thing is here is, remember, terms can be more than one word. So I don't want you to get locked. I don't want you to confuse singular with one, okay? You know, if I say, you know, Max, yeah, that's a singular term. But I can do other things that are also singular that I'm not just using a proper name. Like, for instance, if I say the oldest man in the world is 116 years old, that's singular. The oldest man in the world is a term. You know, and that's a singular expression. If I say that student in class is sleeping, in fourth period was perfect because I could point to one. That's singular. If I say a bird that doesn't fly, that is singular. All right? If I say the brightest student in the whole school, I'm not in a proposition. It's a singular term. I'm talking about one particular person. I'm not talking about an exceptions of a class, and I'm not talking about the entirety of the class. All right? I am talking just a singular thing. Okay? It's pretty straightforward, but I think you can get some impression as to why it's important to be clear on this. Yes?
But, so how couldn't universal and singular kind of be the same thing? So, like you say, God is love. Would God be a singular or a universal?
Okay, you're finding an exception, and he may even talk about it in there because we're talking about plurality of beings, you know. So, if I remember right, and I read his book, he talked about the Trinity and triplets and the equivocation between three persons, the term three persons. So, you know, if we were to say God, oh, I get what you're saying. So God as a being would be singular, right? Is that what you're saying? Like if I say God is love, I'm talking God in the singular sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I don't see why it wouldn't. I don't see why it wouldn't. That's pretty good. That's pretty good that you picked that up.
Well,
Okay, but what I'm saying, what I'm saying though is all that I guess this would be the distinction. Whatever I'm saying about God, I'm saying all about. I'm saying everything about Him.
okay.
Okay. This is all in relation to a class. All right. So if I say Max, I'm talking about a singular within a particular group.
Okay.
If I talk about, you know, the right side of the room, well, that'd be single. If I talk about a few people, some of these, I'm talking about exceptions to the class, as opposed to the all of seventh period logic. You know.
Okay.
Okay. Let's do last. And really, once this is going, these two, universal and particular, are going to be extremely important for you to understand. Because, like I said, once you move into syllogisms and placing them in particular arguments and moods and figures, you'll learn all that means later. It's important, all right? Yes? Sure. Okay, this should be a simple, straightforward one. But again, as simple as this is, there's something that can always be tricky with this. So we're going to say that there's a distinction in terms between the collectively being used and divisively being used. So collectively means I'm referring to the term, to the group as a whole. I know that sounds God. This is when the term refers to the group as a whole. This is when the term refers to the group as a whole. I don't know why it didn't sound right the first time it came out of my mouth.
This is when the term
Refers to the group as a whole. Okay? So if I say, and let's do it with intercessions, because this is an easy way to do it. So I take intercession and somebody says, I want to pray for all the soldiers in the army. That's collective. You know? Soldiers in the army. I'm driving down the street, Mrs. Boyno says, calls me on the phone, where are you? I'm driving by where those Christmas trees are being sold in the parking lot. Okay? The Christmas trees, I'm referring to them as a whole. Okay? This is really simple. There's not, don't read into this. But it still has importance to break up confusion. So in contrast to that then, divisive terms refer to any individual member within a group. Okay? So collective refers to the group as a whole. Divisive, the terms refer to only individual members within that group. And this is important. And I'll express why. So if I were to say, my son-in-law here, I'd like to pray for Tyler as a soldier in the army. I am now expressing a divisive expression of that term. Okay? And rather than all the Christmas trees being sold in the parking lot, I am talking about the Christmas tree that I bought in the parking lot. Now I'm talking about one particular member of that group. Okay?
So divisively is just one?
Yes, again, the term could be more than, it's not just one word, but yeah, it's one individual in that group, all right? So, okay, here's an instance. Somebody might pray, I want to pray for all the people that were affected by Hurricane Irma. That would be collective, right? I want to pray for the people in Puerto Rico that are affected by Irma. That would be divisive. Although, before Ed jumps on me, we could be saying I'm praying for all the people in Puerto Rico. But if we're comparing the class to all the people affected, not all the people in Puerto Rico, if we're looking at all the people affected by Irma, those in Puerto Rico are just one member of that class. You give your hand up?
Yeah, I was just confusing because like, couldn't you when you also say everyone affected by it like that? And
That
then
would be
also,
here.
Couldn't it also be divisively instead of talking about everyone affected by it?
Say that again. Everyone affected by what?
Like, couldn't it also be divisively because you're also excluding everyone from any hurricane? Like,
Okay. Depending on how you word it or the context, possibly. Yeah, I want to pray for, let's be, not to sound stupid, only people affected by Hurricane Irma, as opposed to other things. And then that would be divisive. There's always a context for this, right? Your hand up?
she kind of answered.
Oh, she did. Okay. Okay. Which we'll try to do in the context. Now, why is this important again? How could you not use this in your daily life? You guys know that if somebody refers, like in other words, I've heard people say this, and I get their point, but I don't agree. You pray for a particular region of the country that was hit that was hit by a flood. Well, why do you pray for the people that were hit by a flood? Well, I'm not excluding them. Because I mentioned a particular, if I pray for my son-in-law Tyler in the army, that doesn't imply that I'm not, that it excludes, it excludes everybody else in my particular prayer, but it doesn't exclude them, So what we do is we tend to be very defensive, right, in our, mix collective and divisive terms with comprehensive and extension. And you could see how many of our confusion, how much of the confusion comes about when we're talking about sensitive subjects. If I start to say, for instance, that, again, let's talk about our body strength, as an attribute, a comprehension of the female. And somebody says, well, no, you know, my daughter could do more chin-ups than most guys. Okay, but you're referring to what's happening in the external population. That's the extension. I'm referring to an inner attribute. So you're saying that all women, no, see, now I was only talking about my daughter, Christy, which was, you know, a particular. I wasn't talking about them all. And here, I was using it divisively. I wasn't trying to speak collectively. Now, nobody argues like this. Even if you might be correct, if you were on a news program and you started arguing like this, you'd probably lose the person interviewing you, even if you were correct. So what would you do? You would do what I said originally about, in order to make things clear, you can't talk on a level that they don't grasp. So you're going to constantly try to put it into what we would say, you know, the universal. As long as I can say all this, then we get it. You know, now you can't always talk like that, but you should start being able to pick up on how much miscommunication appears in our world because of this, and why we often say we're talking past each other, or I'm getting so frustrated with you because you're not listening to me. You're just waiting for me to finish so you can speak, and then we keep arguing and nothing gets solved. Well, there's, you know, and it's not just American politics. This is politics all over the world, right?